Most people think nighttime overeating is just about weak willpower. You get to the evening, your defenses are down, and suddenly the kitchen cabinet is calling your name. But here's the thing. The real story of why you overeat at night usually starts hours earlier, in the middle of your afternoon, inside a blood sugar and dopamine cascade that's already setting you up for that nighttime craving long before dinner is even on the table. Stick with me here, because I want to walk through this mechanism carefully, then give you a complete, practical protocol for your afternoon specifically. Let's talk about the connection between afternoon blood sugar dips and nighttime cravings. Your blood sugar naturally fluctuates throughout the day based on what and when you eat. But for many people, a specific pattern emerges in the mid to late afternoon, roughly between 2 and 4 in the afternoon, where blood sugar drops more sharply than at other points in the day. This dip is often related to how lunch was structured, how much time has passed since eating, and your body's natural circadian dip in energy that tends to occur around this same window regardless of food intake. Here's what happens when this afternoon dip goes unaddressed. Your body responds to falling blood sugar by releasing hormones, including a rise in a hunger signaling hormone called ghrelin, and cravings, particularly for quick energy foods like sugar and refined carbohydrates, become noticeably stronger. If this dip isn't managed well in the moment, many people push through it with willpower alone, often successfully making it to dinner without giving in. But here's the part that connects directly to nighttime overeating. That afternoon dip and the resulting hunger and reward-seeking state doesn't simply disappear once you push past it. It tends to compound, layering onto your evening hunger signals and creating a much stronger, harder to resist craving state once you're finally relaxed and unstructured at home in the evening. Here's what this looks like in real life. Making it through the workday reasonably disciplined, only to find yourself unable to stop snacking once you're home and the day's structure has fallen away. Reaching for something sweet or salty after dinner, even when you're not actually physically hungry anymore. Feeling like nighttime is when your willpower simply evaporates, even though you felt perfectly in control just hours earlier. Sound familiar? Most people respond to this pattern by trying to white-knuckle through the evening with sheer willpower, or by restricting food earlier in the day, assuming that eating less will lead to eating less overall. And here's the problem with that approach. Undereating or poorly structuring your afternoon actually tends to intensify the very blood sugar dip and dopamine-driven reward-seeking state that sets up nighttime overeating in the first place, making the eventual evening struggle even harder, not easier. Okay, here's the good news. There's a specific afternoon habit that directly addresses this blood sugar and reward system cascade before it has a chance to compound into an unmanageable nighttime craving. Ready? Let's get into it. The key concept here is that dopamine and blood sugar regulation are tightly linked, and addressing one preemptively can meaningfully calm the other. Here's the analogy I like to use. Think of your afternoon blood sugar dip like a small leak in a dam. If you notice and patch that leak early, while it's still small and manageable, it's a quick, simple fix. But if you ignore it, hoping it'll just stop on its own, the pressure builds, and by evening you're dealing with a much larger, harder to control rush of water, in this case, an intense craving state. That's far more difficult to manage with willpower alone at that point. Here's the mechanism, step by step. As blood sugar drops in the afternoon, your brain's reward system, particularly dopamine signaling in a region called the nucleus accumbens, becomes more sensitized to quick reward foods, sugar and refined carbohydrates specifically, since these provide the fastest blood sugar correction available. If you address this dip directly with a well-timed, well-composed snack, you provide your body the blood sugar correction it's seeking without triggering the same intense dopamine-driven reward-seeking spiral that occurs when the dip is ignored and compounds further into the evening. Here's why timing this intervention in the afternoon specifically, rather than just eating more at dinner, makes such a meaningful difference. Research on eating patterns has shown that addressing hunger and blood sugar dips proactively before they become intense. It requires substantially less food and produces a much milder reward system response than waiting until the craving has fully built and intensified by the time evening arrives. Now, here's how this connects to why some people seem to struggle with this pattern more than others. Factors like poor sleep, high stress, and a lunch that was heavy in refined carbohydrates without adequate protein or fiber all tend to produce a sharper, more pronounced afternoon blood sugar dip, setting up a more intense version of this entire cascade by the time evening arrives. This is where the specific habit comes in, a deliberately timed protein and fiber forward afternoon snack, positioned specifically to interrupt this cascade before it compounds into nighttime overeating. Here's exactly what the habit looks like. Between 2 and 3 in the afternoon, before you feel an intense craving building, have a small, planned snack combining protein and fiber, a handful of nuts with a piece of fruit, Greek yogurt with berries, or hummus with vegetables, roughly 15 to 20 grams of protein combined with a meaningful source of fiber. The key detail is timing this proactively, before the craving intensifies, rather than waiting until you're already fighting an urge for something sweet. Research on protein and fiber-based snacking has shown this combination produces a more gradual, sustained blood sugar response compared to refined carbohydrate snacks and is associated with reduced total caloric intake later in the evening compared to skipping an afternoon snack entirely or choosing a purely sugar-based option. My tip: prepare this snack in advance or keep the ingredients readily accessible, since the entire point is intervening before the craving intensifies, and scrambling to find something appropriate once you're already in a strong craving state tends to result in reaching for whatever's most immediately available, which is often the less optimal choice sitting right in front of you. Now, let's talk about why protein and fiber specifically, rather than just any snack, because this distinction genuinely matters for how effectively this interrupts the cascade we've discussed. A purely sugar or refined carbohydrate snack does address the immediate blood sugar dip, but it does so with a sharp spike followed by another crash shortly afterward, essentially recreating the same problem within an hour or two, rather than resolving it. Protein and fiber produce a more gradual, sustained blood sugar response, providing a longer window of stability that carries you more smoothly through to dinner, without another dip triggering the same reward-seeking cascade again before evening even arrives. Let's talk about the composition of lunch too, since a well-structured lunch can reduce the intensity of this afternoon dip in the first place, making the preventive snack even more effective as a complementary strategy rather than the sole intervention. A lunch built around adequate protein, fiber, and some healthy fat tends to produce a more stable blood sugar curve through the following several hours compared to a lunch heavy in refined carbohydrates alone. Let's talk about hydration too, since mild dehydration in the afternoon can produce symptoms, fatigue, mild headache, difficulty concentrating that are easily mistaken for hunger or a craving, leading people to eat when what their body actually needed was water. Having a full glass of water alongside your afternoon snack helps clarify this distinction and supports the overall goal of this habit. Now, if you're finding this helpful, this is exactly the kind of thing I like breaking down on this channel, taking apart the actual mechanisms behind common struggles like nighttime overeating, not just generic willpower advice that doesn't address why the cravings build so intensely in the first place. So if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe because there's a lot more of this coming. Let's talk about sleep too, since poor sleep has a particularly strong, well-documented effect on this exact cascade. Research has consistently shown that sleep restriction increases ghrelin and decreases leptin the following day, meaning you're hungrier and less satisfied by the same amount of food, and separately, poor sleep has been shown to increase activity in reward-related brain regions, specifically in response to high-calorie food cues. This means a poor night's sleep can significantly amplify the entire afternoon to evening cascade we've discussed today, making the preventive snack habit even more important on days following inadequate sleep. Let's talk about stress too, since chronic stress elevates cortisol, and elevated cortisol has been specifically linked to increased cravings for high-calorie, high-carbohydrate foods, compounding directly with the blood sugar and dopamine mechanism we've focused on throughout this video. If you notice your nighttime overeating pattern is particularly pronounced on high-stress days, addressing stress directly, even briefly through a short walk or a few minutes of deep breathing during your afternoon, may provide additional benefit alongside the snack habit itself. Let's talk about the emotional and environmental side of evening eating too, since blood sugar and dopamine aren't the only factors at play here. The transition from a structured workday to unstructured evening time removes a lot of the external constraints that kept eating decisions more automatic and less deliberated during the day. Simply being aware of this shift and perhaps having a planned, satisfying evening activity that doesn't center around food, a short walk, a hobby, a call with a friend, can address the environmental piece of this pattern alongside the biological mechanism we've focused on. Let's talk timeline because I want to be realistic here rather than promising an instant fix. Many people notice a difference in the intensity of their evening cravings within just a few days of consistently implementing this afternoon snack habit, since it's directly interrupting a same-day blood sugar and reward cascade rather than requiring weeks to show any effect. The longer-term benefit, more consistent, lower total evening intake, and less of that willpower evaporating feeling tends to solidify over 2 to 3 weeks of consistent practice, as this becomes a more automatic, established part of your daily routine. This isn't medical advice for any diagnosed eating disorder or binge eating pattern. And if nighttime eating feels compulsive, distressing, or difficult to control despite these strategies, working with your doctor or a mental health professional specializing in eating patterns is the appropriate next step, rather than relying solely on general content like this. Let me answer a few common questions since I know these will come up. First, won't eating an extra snack just add more total calories to my day? For most people, the modest calories in a well-composed afternoon snack are more than offset by a meaningfully reduced, less chaotic evening eating pattern, since the entire mechanism we've discussed tends to produce larger, less controlled eating later when the afternoon dip goes unaddressed. Many people find their total daily intake actually decreases with this approach, though individual results vary based on your specific starting pattern. Second, what if I'm not someone who experiences a strong afternoon dip, just nighttime cravings specifically? The mechanism can still apply even if the afternoon dip itself feels mild or unnoticed, since blood sugar fluctuations aren't always consciously perceived as hunger in the moment. If nighttime cravings are a consistent pattern for you, it's worth experimenting with this afternoon habit for a couple of weeks to see whether it makes a noticeable difference, even without a strongly felt afternoon trigger. Third, is this the same thing as just eating dinner earlier? Not quite, though eating dinner earlier can help with a related but distinct pattern. This habit specifically targets the afternoon blood sugar and dopamine cascade before it compounds, which is a different intervention point than simply shifting your dinner time earlier, though the two strategies can certainly be combined for people who find both helpful. So here's the bigger picture I want you to walk away with. This was never just about weak willpower falling apart once evening arrives. It's about a specific blood sugar and dopamine cascade that often begins hours earlier in your afternoon and compounds progressively if left unaddressed until it becomes a much larger, harder to manage craving state by nighttime. A well-timed, protein and fiber-forward afternoon snack combined with a well-structured lunch, good hydration, adequate sleep, and stress management all work together to interrupt this cascade before it builds into the pattern you've been fighting every single evening. Combine these consistently, and you're giving your body's blood sugar and reward system the proactive support it needs, rather than waiting until evening to fight an already intensified craving with willpower alone. If you want to go deeper, my next video breaks down exactly how the same dopamine and reward mechanism connects to sugar cravings more broadly, and specific strategies for genuinely reducing your taste for sugar over time, not just managing the cravings in the moment. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. I'll see you in the next one.